Are you looking for information to help you choose resources for secondary English? Well, today on Resource Review, we're evaluating 3 that might interest you. A poetry website, a multimedia story-based CD-ROM, and a website that links to newspapers worldwide. To find out more, keep watching today's Resource Review. Well, joining us today to recommend the resources is Adrian Blight. Adrian's a former English teacher, now turned teacher trainer and educational consultant. We also have Barbara Comridge. Barbara's an educational consultant for Bedfordshire LEA and a committee member of NATE. And we also have Colin Hinson, a freelance educational writer. So, welcome to you all, thanks for coming. Adrian, tell us about your first resource. It's a website from the BBC called Poetry on Display. Why did you choose this resource?
This resource I've chosen because I feel it's a very interactive way of presenting poetry to students. Poetry is traditionally a very difficult topic to launch with students, particularly younger ones, and this gives a very nice, fun, exciting way into very difficult concepts. So there are lots of other websites presumably out there. Can you explain this one to us and what you like about it? This is where writers, famous and non-famous writers, have used their text and converted it into, through Flash and through multimedia, into some kind of visual display for students, so it brings their poetry to life. Poetry on Display is its name, and it is displaying poetry in a very different and unique way. OK, well, thank you very much. Before we discuss the resource any further, let's take a look at it in use. During the half-term break, we went along to Oxford Brookes University, where English lecturer Harry Dodds is looking at the resource with his trainee teachers.
The first resource we were using today was a BBC production, Poetry on Display, which consisted of a wide selection of, I suppose you could call them, visualizations and animations of a number of quite original poems. Some of them had access to sound files, and from the same site it was possible to access poets reading their own work. Their first task was simply to explore and to play around with it, and they were looking for the initial impact and the ease of use. I think the general reaction of trainees was, this is interesting, it's got some visual appeal, you may use it, get kids thinking about visual imagery in poems and how you can realise that.
In a way, it can make it accessible because it's so visual that it could help students interact with the poem due to the visuals. You read it and then you have a visual associated with it, so sometimes that can be helpful.
Not very helpful in terms of analysis or in terms of getting to grip with the non-visual features of a poem. That came through very strongly from their comments.
So it dumbs down the poetry and it takes away the imaginative element from it, because the children are being presented with images ready-made for them. It means they don't have to do it themselves.
We found the animation quite distracting, and with one of the, I think it was the spiders, one of the stanzas, rather than having the whole poem laid out, the stanzas were separated, and we found that quite difficult for us to sort of appreciate, let alone children.
I don't think I'd recommend it as a teaching resource simply because it wasn't designed as a teaching resource. So I think what we've got here is a starting point and a stimulus resource rather than something of great literary value in itself.
Well, Adrian, a fairly critical assessment there, but because it was half-term, we couldn't show it being used by pupils. Now, do you think that they might have had a better response than the trainee teachers?
I think it's actually what they picked up on there, particularly what Harry said at the end, is exactly what I would use it for anyway, which is a stimulus resource. I don't think anybody would use this as a long-term teaching resource. But if you're trying to stimulate students to have an interest in poetry, it's exactly what I would use it for, which is a teaching resource. And that's what the students picked up on there, I think.
Barbara, what were you want? You said something really nice while we were watching.
I said I think he's forgotten what children are like, because actually if you think children are used to a visual world, they're used to accessing things in small chunks, and also there is something, it's a different way of reading a poem, and poems are up to various kinds of reading. There isn't a right way to read a poem. It will help to children engage emotionally, which is what poetry is about.
Right. Colin, what were your views on this website?
Well, I really enjoyed looking at it right from the start. But after I was using it for a little while, I began to realise that I was concentrating less on the poetry and much more on the image. And I realised that I wasn't actually reading the poems in the end, and I just worried that this might be something that would happen.
Is it a bit distracting when you're trying to focus on the poetry?
I think it would be if you were using it as the only way of teaching poetry. I think if it's a blended learning approach and you're using other traditional methods such as texts and you know, collages and things like this, then I don't think it would be. I think the danger with ICT is that the teacher thinks they have no role, whereas a website like this means the teacher still has to plan this into their lessons.
OK. Well, thank you very much. Now let's move on to Adrian's second choice of resource, and this time it's a CD-ROM, and it's called The Haunting of Broadbank Hall. Now, tell us, again, why you picked this CD-ROM out, and what is it?
I chose this for several reasons. The first reason is because I mean, students, the concept of it, a haunted house, is something I think the students in Key Stage 3, which this is aimed at, would be very interested in. And also for me, this is nice because it's taking ICT a step further and moving away from traditional word processing and PowerPoint and Excel and the things that students do, and moving into Photoshop and website production. It covers ICT skills, communication skills, mathematics skills. Okay. I think it's a very simple but quite varied resource.
All right, thank you very much. Well, let's go back to Oxford Brookes University, where Harry Dodds and his trainee teachers are reviewing this resource for us.
The second resource we were using was a CD-based production called The Haunting of Broadbank Hall. It was presented as almost a game in which pupils are set 4 tasks. One of the tasks was a nice photographic task. That was well supported by a very good tutorial on how to use Photoshop. It appeared to have been designed initially to support subjects other than English. There is quite a strong maths element in it, for instance, but communication also.
At the moment we're thinking the learning objectives are a bit confused because they're trying to do too much in each task and they're not quite sure really what they want the kids to do, so the teachers would probably have to adapt the material a lot and work with it themselves beforehand.
The resource has plenty of opportunities for encouraging pupils to engage in good collaborative talk and in problem-solving activity, but it doesn't really take off into anything other than speaking and listening. The other problem with it, I think, was that it had all the appearances of a 10-year-old computer game, and I don't think that would have got a very positive reaction from media-savvy kids now. As an English resource, it wasn't brilliant. Their specific criticisms were lack of ease of use, the sheer density of text on the introductory pages, several spelling mistakes, and a general sort of cumbersomeness about the whole thing. It was hard work to get under the skin of it.
Well, another not particularly favourable assessment there from Oxford Brookes University, Harry Dodds. What would you say to his comments?
First of all, I'd ask him what I've done to upset him, because he clearly doesn't like my selections. I would say that
this is a brand new resource.
This is a new resource. It's not available as yet, so there is. I imagine there probably is some things that could be improved. But I think that when he mentioned he couldn't get under the skin of it, I think that's where he went wrong. Is that he hasn't got under the skin of it. When you do, I think it's a really valuable, varied, interesting resource for students.
Okay, Colin.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm going to back you up on this one. I thought it was a great resource, and I think that. They were being a little bit too critical of this. I think that there was a lot more than speaking and listening that happens in there. I felt that it was very, very engaging. The cross-curricular aspect that he mentioned, it was almost a criticism, that's not a criticism to me. You know, cross-curricular work is fantastic, and if it does it well, then so be it.
Yes, Barbara, you're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I agree absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I do in my day job is look at the development of language and literacy across the curriculum, and anything that engages children, that will get them involved in reading, writing and talking together, which is after all what we spend most of our lives doing, can only be to their benefit.
I mean, it certainly looked, the screens that we saw, I mean, they looked interesting. Yeah. One thing I would say, it's quite pricey, isn't it? I mean, for the teacher CD and just 5 for the pupils, it's £150, and you go up from there for the more pupil CDs you have. So, I mean, that could be a drawback.
It is pricey, and whether it will remain at that price when it's in production, I don't know, but at the moment I think it is pricey for what you get. Also the software it uses that students need access to, Photoshop and Macromedia products, are expensive as well.
The other thing about cost is that if the resource is really worth it, if it really can be used for more than one department, can be used across various year groups, then it's worth the money. It's being careful about making the use of what you've got.
And just a final word from you, Adrian, do you think this resource is something that could be used across different years, different classes? I mean, it's not just a one-lesson wonder.
No, it's not. I mean, it's a series of lessons anyway, I think, but you could break it up and you could do some of it in maths and some of it in English and some of it in ICT. But I think also it's another resource that will stimulate the teacher's own creativity and things.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Now let's move on to the third resource. And this is another website. It's called thepaperboy.com. So, Adrian, we've got some examples down there at the front. What is this website?
This is the website that I wish I'd created. I wish I'd had the idea for this website. I think it's fantastic. It's essentially a portal for all online newspapers from around the world. The point of it for me is to open up students to the fact that there is other countries in the world for a start, but also that media has got bias and opinion and objectivity and subjectivity, and this is a way of them exploring different approaches to news and current affairs.
OK, Colin, I mean, do you think this site offers something more than just, I mean, going to the Times Online or the Australian Age Online? I mean, they've all got their own websites, so is this offering teachers something else?
I think it offers more because it is, as you said, it's a portal, so what it allows pupils to do is to have a look at these online newspapers and to make those comparisons. I think it's great from that point of view. Yeah.
Barbara, time for a comment from you.
Well, I think the opportunity that the web gives you to really get international is just amazing, and it gives children a much wider view of themselves, and to be able to take the current world situation and look at it is just very powerful.
So a final word from you then, Adrian, on that particular resource.
I think that students suffer from obsessive compulsive search disorder, and if you give them a free rein to search the internet, they'll spend their time searching, and this hones their search.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you all very much. That's all we've got time for today. But just to summarise, the 3 resources that we looked at were Poetry on Display, a BBC website, The Haunting of Broadbank Hall CD-ROM from Synergy Learning, and thepaperboy.com, a website from Ian Duckworth. For more information about all of the resources we've discussed today and to post your own comments about other resources for secondary English, go to our website. It's teachers.tv/resource review. Or if you want to, email us. We're at resourcereview@teachers.tv. So all that remains for me to do is to say thank you to our panel, to Adrian, to Barbara and to Colin. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Resource Review. Bye-bye.